Have you ever just felt like you're operating on a totally different wavelength from everyone else? You know, that feeling that your mind is both this powerful, amazing thing and also completely exhausting? Well, today, we're going to dive into the psychology behind these misunderstood traits, and we're going to reframe them, not as flaws, but as the logical, natural outcomes of a pretty unique mental wiring.
So let me ask you this. Does your mind feel like both your greatest asset and your heaviest burden all at once? If that hits home for you, you should know that psychology shows this isn't some weird contradiction. It's actually the very core of the experience for a lot of highly intelligent or deeply adaptive people.
And maybe you feel tired or mentally overloaded or just disconnected, even when, from the outside, your life looks totally fine. You're not imagining it, and it's definitely not a sign that something's wrong with you. It's a recognized pattern for a brain that just happens to process reality in a fundamentally different way.
So where does this feeling even come from? We're going to look at two main causes, and we'll start with the first one, the internal mechanics of what I like to call the overclocked brain. This is all about the cognitive logic that comes with high intelligence.
And it's so important to see that these struggles listed here, they aren't character flaws, not at all. They are the direct consequences of having a high IQ brain, a mind that rarely slows down, that questions the rules, that gets bored with repetitive stuff. That isn't a weak mind. It's a brain that actually needs complexity and novelty just to stay engaged.
Let's zoom in on that first point. What a lot of people just dismiss as overthinking is much better understood as cognitive depth. It's basically your brain's default setting. It's always on, always processing. It's why you analyze conversations long after they're over or question decisions you've already made. Now, this isn't necessarily anxiety. It's just your mind working overtime, which you can imagine naturally leads to some serious mental exhaustion.
Okay, so here's another classic misunderstanding. It's how a highly intelligent person handles pressure. They might seem really calm or quiet on the outside, which people often read as being cold or distant or even weak. But what psychology shows us is that something much more sophisticated is actually happening just beneath the surface.
And what's really going on is this incredible thing called cognitive inhibition. Think of it as the mental gap that high IQ individuals can create between an emotional impulse and their actual action. So instead of just reacting instantly, they pause, they evaluate, and then they choose how to respond. That quietness you see? It isn't a lack of feeling at all, it's a quiet display of incredible mental strength and self-control.
All right, let's move on to our second cause and see how these ideas build on each other, because it's not just about raw intelligence, it's also about what we can call the adapted brain. This is like the blueprint that gets created by your formative years, where early life experiences forge some really powerful and lasting traits.
You can actually see how this happens step by step. When a kid's environment is emotionally unpredictable, their brain doesn't just sit around waiting for support. It adapts. It learns to rely on itself, to self-soothe. Now, this develops crucial survival skills like independence and hyper-awareness, but the flip side is that as an adult, it can make trusting other people or even just asking for help feel incredibly difficult.
Now, a key concept for this is something called parentification. This is basically when a child has to grow up way too fast. They're forced to take on emotional responsibilities that they just aren't ready for. They learn to be the responsible one, the problem solver. But here's the crucial point. They learn all about responsibility, but they completely miss the lesson on how to need other people safely. And that often leads to feeling guilty for simply having needs as an adult.
But here's the thing. Out of that really tough start, some pretty incredible strengths are forged. High emotional endurance, fierce independence, deep empathy. These aren't just personality quirks. They are highly sophisticated survival tools. They allow someone to withstand immense pressure, but they're also the very reason they might keep the world at arm's length.
So we have the overclocked brain and the adapted brain. Now let's look at how these internal wirings actually show up in the real world, as these quiet strengths that send out signals most people just completely misunderstand.
And there's a huge contrast here between external and internal validation. See, most people kind of operate on external validation. They need that social proof, they follow the trends to feel included. But the internally validated person, they just don't. Their motivation comes from personal meaning, from an internal compass, and they're comfortable standing alone because their sense of self isn't hanging on whether the crowd approves or not.
I love this metaphor for it. People who don't rely on group identity don't need a jersey to know who they are. Their sense of self is stable. It comes from within. It doesn't depend on belonging to a winning or a losing team.
And this same logic applies perfectly to social media, which causes so many misunderstandings, right? Not posting photos isn't about being insecure. Psychologically, it's a choice. It's what you could call internal anchorage. Your confidence isn't tied to likes. It's narrative control, a real desire to own your own story. And it's about being comfortable unknown, which is an emotional strength that allows you to be totally okay with being misunderstood.
So we've looked at the cognitive logic and the adaptive history behind these traits. The final step now is to bring all of these threads together, to move from just logically understanding it to a place of genuine self-acceptance.
And this is the most important thing I want you to take away from all this. If any of this has felt familiar to you, your struggles are not flaws. They are the cost of depth. A mind that processes more deeply, that adapted to survive, and that feels more intensely, well, it comes with a weight. But it also comes with incredible strength.
And that, right there, is the whole point. The goal isn't to try and change your fundamental wiring. The key is to understand the logic behind it. It's about finally seeing that your traits, even the really challenging ones, make perfect sense given how your mind is built and what it's been through.
So this brings us to our final question. We've laid out the why. Now that you can see the logic of your own mind, the question isn't, how do I fix myself, but what comes next? How do you start working with this powerful, deep, and unique mind of yours instead of constantly fighting against it?